And we're now recording. All right. Well, good afternoon. Buenas tardes. Thank you all for being with us today for the very first of what we hope to be the start of a similar important conversations that related to the Puerto Rican community. This afternoon we'll be engaging in a critical conversation surrounding Blackness in the Puerto Rican community with the event Y Tu Abuela. As many of you know, the title is from a poem, Y Tu Abuela ¿Dónde está? By Afro-Puerto Rican poet Fortunado Vizcarrondo. The National Conference of Puerto Rican Women in Southern California chapter is hosting this conversation. NACOPRW is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization seeking to promote full participation of Puerto Rican and other Latinx women in the social, economic, and political life in the United States. We're also receiving sponsorship from the following two organizations: the Paulo Freire Democratic Project at Chapman University, and their initiatives reflect the political, pedagogical, and ethical imperatives of the great Brazilian educator and philosopher Paulo Freire, and capture his democratic struggle for social justice. And the Colegas Group, a professional development, consulting, and mentorship network and service whose mission is to find ways for faculty to allow their teaching and their ideas to reach a wider audience. And you can read a little bit more about our sponsors in the About tab in the events on Facebook. So first reminder, the National Conference of Puerto Rican Women is using this event to raise funds for our Latina Scholarship Fund. So there's a link also to the events within the events page on Facebook. It's NACOPRW.org, NACOPRW-SOCAL.org. If you're so inclined, any amount is welcome, and it will definitely go to a good cause. I am Marie Nubia Feliciano, an Afro-Boricua, born in Vieques, raised in Culebra in Southern California, and I'll be the moderator for today. And the discussion will take place primarily in English, but I leave it up to the panelists to express themselves in either English, Spanish, or a combination of both. And if necessary, I'll translate to ensure that everybody is following along. So before we begin, I want to note that the panelists and I are on Zoom, and the audience is watching via Facebook Live. And so this event's being recorded, and we will post the recording soon after the event is over. And we're here today for a very special event with an esteemed panel of Afro-Boricua women from all walks of life. Thank you all so much for your work and for being here today. And I'm going to do a brief introduction of the panelists. Dhalma Llanos Figueroa was born in Puerto Rico and raised in New York City. She's a product of Puerto Rican communities on the island and in the South Bronx. She attended the New York City public school system and received her academic degree from SUNY at Buffalo and Queens College, SUNY. As a child, she was sent to live with her grandparents in Puerto Rico, where she was introduced to the culture of rural Puerto Rico, including storytelling that came naturally to the women in her family, especially the older women. Much of her work is based on her experiences during this time. The 2009 hardcover edition of Daughters of the Stone, incredible book, I highly recommend it, was listed as a 2010 finalist for the Penn Robert W. Bingham Prize. Her short stories have appeared in anthologies and literary journals. And since her retirement, Dhalma continues to dedicate herself to her writing, speaking engagements, and workshops, and she resides in the Bronx with her husband, photographer, Jonathan Lessig. Lachey Rodriguez. Say hi. She has a master's degree in communication management from USC, which she just recently received this past May. Her undergraduate work was in the arts, has experience as an actor, producer, and director. Recently, she's worked with the California State Legislature, coordinating community and state events, working on successful campaigns. Her candidate won, and collaborating with elected officials and their offices and policy. She plans to merge her communications, entertainment, and political experience into a career. Then we have Dr. Genice Sarcedo-Magruder. As an Afro-Latina education leader with higher educational experience in equity and diversity, Title IX, multicultural education, community college athletics, and residential life. A Black and Puerto Rican first-generation college student from low-income background, her personal and professional experiences influence her work and advocacy for college students. Currently, she is Dean of Student Services and Equity at Los Angeles Pierce College. And in addition to experience at the community college, she also has worked at private institutions of of the other branches of public higher education in California, the UC and the CSC. And finally, we have Yolanda Serrano. Hello. Yeah. She was born and raised in the 70s and 80s, Puerto Rico. She emigrated to Florida to pursue a bachelor's in international relations with a double major in criminal justice. Yolanda has always enjoyed helping others, but she decided to seek higher education as a licensed clinical social worker. On accomplishing this mission and obtaining her licensure, Yolanda has worked in various venues, including several states in the United States, mainland, Puerto Rico, Iraq, and Jordan, serving diverse populations such as victims and offenders of domestic violence, refugees, as well as military and diplomatic populations. We have one more panelist who couldn't be with us today, Dr. Gloria Caballero Arce. Her power went out because of the storm in the Northeast. But just a little bit about her. She's an educator, community activist, artist, accomplished professional experience in a wide range of leadership roles in academic and community service environments. She's founder of the Latino Scholarship Fund in Holyoke, Massachusetts, and she's published Facing Education, Portraits of Holyoke School Children. She'll be joining us in other panels, hopefully as weather permits. And so we will want to thank you all again for joining us. Facebook Live will be monitored by two members of the Paulo Freire Democratic Project, Kevin Stockbridge, an assistant professor and co-coordinator of the Masters of Arts in Teaching program at Chapman University, and Jorge Rodriguez, an assistant professor in the Integrated Educational Studies program at Chapman. Be sure to post your questions. We're going to capture them at the end, right around 5:20, 5:25. We're going to jump to Facebook Live and pull your questions and present them to the panelists to address. And just to let you know, we have a hashtag for the event, hashtag #Abuela. So if you're so inclined, use this hashtag to share your thoughts about the conversation. So you can get started. Yay. So first question, how has acknowledging your Blackness impacted your experiences within the Puerto Rican community? And let's start with Lachey.
Thank you so much for having me here today. It's such a loaded question, but it's been interesting. It's been a mixed bag, I would say. I definitely have a range of colors in my family, from my abuelo being darker than me and my abuela being more fair-skinned. So I would say it's definitely been empowered and supportive coming from my abuelo and those who are more of the skin tone that I was, but almost a question of kind of why and almost confusion, I would say, for those who are a little bit more fair-skinned, and you know, why, almost as if I was separating the two within the culture. You know, why are you separating your black? Being black in Puerto Rico is part of our culture. So, you know, we coming from the Taino as well as the Spanish. So, you know, all that together makes us who we are. So, but why so much, you know, I guess was the question why. So for me, it's been interesting, especially, you know, at home with just trying to be empowered and kind of explain and educate to other folks in the family who may not, you know, see so much of the melanin in their skin tone to really stand out, because that's the one thing is we stand out, you know, our skin tone is what we are. So it's definitely been a mixed bag, but I think I've taken the support and the empowerment that I received and turned that energy into educating those who may not in my family quite see, you know, that history. And I think it's a lot of that, educating the history. They don't really have some of that. And I think that's a huge factor into maybe why they have those kind of sentiments.
Okay, thank you. And Yolanda, how would you answer that question for yourself?
Well, for me, I consider it a three-part situation. Number one, I was born and raised in Puerto Rico until age 17. So it wasn't any time that somebody told me, you're black. You know, it was more of, let's go get your hair done because it's bad hair. You know, my hair is not for force, you know. So, so we had that kind of situation. Maybe in the family, my grandfather was a white man and he would make black jokes. He would do that. But something like, ¿cuántos negros caben en una manguera? How many blacks fit in a hose, you know? And then you would have to say un chorro, which means a montón, a whole lot of them, you know? So he would say jokes like that, and then I didn't understand. He was calling me black. You know, so whatever. Then I come to the United States, and it happened that sometimes I would be included in groups of white people, and they would tell me, don't bring such and such. And such was Black American. So then I had to find myself advocating and saying, can't you see I'm Black? You know, but that was kind of interesting. And then coming into the town I live now, that there's more Black Americans here, and then I've had to include myself in the Black community because they wouldn't consider me Black. So that was an argument of, if I know the language, if I remember words of my African ancestors, if I know how to play the drum, and I remember their religion, how come I'm not Black? So that has been my journey through acknowledging my Blackness.
Okay, yeah, that's through stories and family and jokes and all that kind of stuff. So, Dhalma, I think that's a really good segue for you to be able to. What do you think about that? How has acknowledging your Blackness impact your experiences?
For me, actually, it has also been a journey, because I have lived in Puerto Rico part of my life, although I wasn't brought up there. And most of my life I've lived in New York City. So in Puerto Rico, even though within the family, there was always this orgullo afro-negroide, right? A pride in our Black culture in terms of food and dance and music and that kind of stuff. But there's also the overlay of racism in terms of, you know, marrying someone lighter than you with straight hair para mejorar la raza, right? To improve the race. Or you need to fix your hair, the implication being that there's something wrong with it. And as I said, I grew up in New York City, and I'm older than the rest of the panel. So I grew up in New York City during the civil rights struggles. And my mother was always afraid that, you know, my afro made me look like Angela Davis, and they were going to come in and arrest me and all of that. And in the community, there was this constant need for me to define myself as either Black or what's called in those days Spanish. Well, okay, so I'm not Spanish. Spanish is from Spain. I'm Puerto Rican. And then the question is always, well, that's such a funny name. Is your mother Black and your father's Puerto Rican, or your father's Black and your mother's Puerto Rican? And it's, dude, they're both Black and they're both Puerto Rican. No, how difficult is that to understand? But it has been a journey, and one of the reasons why I'm a writer is to give us a face and a voice in the American dialogue, in the North American dialogue. We have been here for over 100 years, and yet we are not recognized within the culture. We haven't been until recently. And that just burned me. You know, I got tired of people saying, well, you don't look like Rita Moreno, or you don't look like this one. And then the Black images of Black Puerto Ricans on television were never identified as Puerto Rican. So you had Afro-Puerto Rican actors during the 40s and 50s and 60s that they were always cast as African American, which is fine, but it also silenced and erased us. So my mission is to say, here we are, we've been here, we're not going anywhere, and this is who we are.
Yeah. And how about you, Genice? And then we'll finish up with Yolanda.
Well, and I think to Dhalma's point is that, you know, in reclaiming this identity and, you know, using our existence to really force others to challenge the way that they perceive us versus how we self-identify. I think that for me, that's been really important. And then recognizing within our own community, within our families, as, you know, Lachey was saying as well, is that we have this great diversity, but, you know, our communities are still not free from discrimination or from, you know, self-internalized racism or racism, because we look so different. But our families, or my family in particular, sometimes is easy and quick to say like, oh, well, we can't be racist because we're so diverse. Like, but have you listened to some of the things that you've said to your own family members and how problematic that is? and then just reminding them, like, you know, we're Black too.
Yes, that's very true. We forget that we look in the mirror. And I don't know if that's a common practice, but oftentimes I remember thinking to myself that, you know, I forget what I look like. And so I just sort of move around in the world. I don't look in the mirror very often, and it's just a habit. And I forget. And then I then don't understand the responses of the people in the room. It's just like, because I forget what I look like. And
That has happened to me.
that's happened to you. Yeah, for real. So, all right. So then where do you think anti-Blackness sentiments come from in the Puerto Rican community? Let's start with Yolanda this time.
Good, yeah. I would say that it's a desire for upward mobility. I mean, nobody wants to be the underdog, right? And in our communities, the way to go up was to mejorar la raza. Right. So the generation before me, that was a common saying when I was growing up. Hay que mejorar la raza. But then also there was a saying of, come on, humble down again, because the one that doesn't have dingo has mandingo, which are the African tribes. Right. You know, so I really believe that that's pretty much it, a desire for upward mobility and part of the indoctrination and assimilation that white was better.
Yeah, good point. So then, Lachey, what do you think? Where do you think anti-Blackness sentiments come from in the Puerto Rican community?
I think I'd have to agree a lot with Yolanda. You know, it does come from, you know, the colonial past that has to base itself on supremacy. And it goes back to, you know, the like you're saying, the upward mobility and it transform itself of wanting to be able to navigate and just kind of make your way through life, right? Try to get your economic advantage. So the more that you can pass, right, for the dominant class, therefore you have more economic opportunity and more educational attainment as well. So I think with that comes with it. And I think also with our media, our imagery, I think as we spoke before, as those were not identifying, even though they were, you know, Afro-Puerto Rican, you know, that we weren't able to see that within ourselves growing up. So I think when we don't see ourselves and see that representation, there's that lack. Therefore, you know, we're pushing ourselves to look, you know, we don't realize that inherent and implicit bias we have towards ourselves as well.
And Dhalma, what do you think? And then Genice.
I agree that it has to do a lot with our colonial status, because first Spain and then the United States imposed their own racism on us. And of course, as Yolanda said, nobody wanted to be at the bottom of that society. So they tried very hard to be one of the 40 different categories of racial realities that the Spaniards came up with. So it's like, no, you're not Black, you're trigueño, you're wheat color, or you're not Black, you're indio, or you're not Black, you're anything but Black is,
mulata,
you know, mulata, whatever. And we do have all those gradations within our society, but I think that it's been used to divide and conquer, and it's been used very effectively, and it continues to be used.
Yeah, and
both on the island and in the diaspora.
Jenice?
I'm sorry, Genice.
No problem. And I would echo exactly what you're saying, Dhalma, in terms of, you know, it's so, how do I say, like it's reinforced within the community. You know, it's this external force that it started, but now it's so ingrained in, you know, and it's passed on generationally as well. You know, and it's something I hope not to pass on, you know, to my children and to future generations, and to really examine it, because we have this opportunity now to really look at it and talk about it and to change it. Where in the past, it wasn't even a question or a challenge, where we have that drive to have that challenge right now.
Yeah, go ahead, Yolanda.
If I could sprinkle it a little bit with the money factor, okay? Because then comes my two super hardworking parents that had a homework, you know, to move us forward, and they put us in Catholic school. So that's what then when somehow some of my color kind of erased. I actually had this conversation with a friend of mine recently, and it's that we were able to talk differently. We were able to learn more of the American culture within Puerto Rico. So it kind of moved us up a little bit. The same Puerto Rican woman, but just, you know, with a little bit more education and raised in a Catholic school, which put us, how would you call it? Let us mingle with a wider population.
And so, as opposed to the public school, which was for everybody else, is that it?
Correct. Mm-hmm. But we didn't know this. It just, you know, happened.
Yeah.
And I also think it's in little things that we may not inherently pay attention to. I mean, I can even see within growing up in my household, I mean, we had great reference back to our hair. And, you know, even in the last 10 years, I've seen just even in the regular Targets and stores, there's more products for more diversity of hair, which even I hadn't seen growing up myself. And so when we look at those little things, and you know, makes me remind myself growing up, oh, you know, my hair texture wasn't wanted, you know, it wasn't desirable. So, you know, that was already an internalized, you know, anti-Blackness. And it's in our verbiage, it's in our music, you know, it's in those little things that we, you know, really don't sometimes pay attention to. And sometimes the things that we censor ourselves about saying or doing, or the way we act around others, you know, I think also is just, you know, those little things that we haven't even realized that we're doing to keep us from, you know, our real selves, or even how we express ourselves.
Yeah, it's true. Sometimes it's, for me, it's you know, putting on what I need to put on so that the environment I'm entering can relax enough so that I'm heard and understood and received. And I'm talking specifically about teaching, because I always joke with my students when I flat iron my hair, this is my work hair. This is not my hair that I do or put on in other circumstances, in other contexts. And I tell them specifically that teaching at a predominantly white institution, there's a lot of things that we all bring to this experience, because we live sort of in a white, or at least this idea of whiteness within the United States. And so we've all internalized this preference. And I need to walk into that space very intentional, knowing that I'm entering folks that subconsciously have preferences for whiteness or white-like. And so I can't do much about my skin color. I'm not going to put any chemicals on there. And I can just, you know, my Puerto Rican hair has a lot of options. We can do a lot of different things with our hair. And so this is the option that I've chosen to do and create work hair. And I also tell them that because of my hair texture, I can't just walk into a Supercuts or any sort of, you know, regular haircutting place and get my hair trimmed. Even if it's straightened and I walk in and I ask, can you do a dry haircut? They can't, they will say no, because there's an issue of guaranteeing the haircut. And it's like, I just need like 2 inches off the bottom. and they have told me no. And so there are issues that, and getting back to the anti-Blackness sentiment, I see that as a coping mechanism for myself, because there have been times where I did not like how my hair did, I only wanted it to do one thing. And I had the chemical straighteners, and I did have the burns along the edges. And so there were a lot of issues that I had to deal with and work through myself with regards to all of this. And so that is something that I see. Okay, if it can happen to me, it's probably happening to most of us. And just an acknowledgement that that's what has impacted who we are is important. And I think our next panel conversation will be almost exclusively about hair.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, so where do you go? Like, I don't know. So, all right. And so then the last question. Why do you think it's important to acknowledge and celebrate the Blackness of the Puerto Rican community?
not to lose it.
Not to. So sort of a cultural memory.
Absolutely. I believe that part of what makes us Puerto Rican, the Puerto Ricans of yesterday and the Puerto Ricans of today, is our flav, our African flav, along with the Indian flav and the white flav. So I don't want to forget any of it, you know. And in reality, you know, even our clairvoyancy, because I claim some of it too. Our ancestors used to be able to count on their ancestors to see the future, to feel confident. And I still count on that. And I would like for Puerto Ricans to continue to do that, you know? So I really would love it if we can continue to play the drum, and all of a sudden a drum plays and all Puerto Ricans come out, no matter what color they look like, you know? So
this is like, ¿dónde está ese ruido? ¿Dónde viene?
Exactly. Bomba, ¿dónde? So that kind of situation is what I would like.
Right. Very true. How about you, Lachey?
Yeah, I would agree. I think historically, you know, Black African culture has been erased. So I think it's important that we do, you know, continue to support and empower, and definitely, you know, just more exposure on it. I think it's just so important, so we don't forget, you know, contributions that were made. And I think the time is now to definitely highlight and speak upon it. So yeah, and also to, you know, relay some of those fears that have been put out there, those tales, those, you know, those imagery of us that is negative, that isn't, you know, real. So you'll be able to dismantle that as well.
Yeah. And how about you, Genice?
Yeah, I think using that celebration to challenge people's perceptions and to really, you know, show them who we are, acknowledging our shared experience, our shared histories, I think is so important. And really just allowing us to continue to build community. And for me personally, I think part of that celebration and acknowledgement is really, you know, using whatever privilege that you have to help benefit and to move the community forward. So what privilege I may not have based on my appearance, I have based on education or based on my professional experience. So being able to use that and take that to my campus and to my workplace, and to, you know, impact initiatives and decision making, you know, at my college and within my district, and to use that privilege that I have, even if I don't have, you know, color privilege in other areas of my life.
Right. How about you, Dhalma?
As I said, I write a lot about 19th century Puerto Rican society on the island. And I think a lot about ancestors and tradition and how we were able to endure, survive, and thrive despite the years of enslavement and negativity and prejudice and racism. I think part of it has to do with our innate spirituality, which I think we carry with us whether we ritualize it or not.
Absolutely.
And I think that comes through everything that we do, whether it's food preparation, our aesthetic that comes through in all our arts. I think it's una mancha de plátano, you know, it's stamped in our essence, and it comes out whether we like it or not. And sometimes I'm going along, minding my own business, dealing in a very professional environment, and all of a sudden stuff's coming out of my mouth. Like, where did that come from? I did not plan on that. But it's so much a part of who I am, whether it's a look, you know, or a movement of the head.
Checking your face.
Or how you walk down the street culipandeando, you know, it's in our bodies and in our language, whether it's Spanish or English or whatever language it is. And it's in our tales and our stories. And so for me, being an Afro-Puerto Rican is two sides of one coin. There's no way you're separating it. You know, I can't choose to be Black or choose to be Boricua. I am all of that and a bag of chips.
Yeah, and it's very true. Oftentimes, this morning I had an accountability and writing group that I met with, and I tell them that through writing and education, I think that's where I have the most access to the energy and the legacy of my Puerto Rican culture, because sometimes when I write, and while I was writing my dissertation, I would just get into this flow, and I would start writing, and things would just come out of me. These very poetic phrases would come out, you know, like screaming to the wind, somos boricuas, and it's like, where did that come from? And sometimes I'm writing and I look up and I read it again and I don't remember writing it. And so there's these, I feel like this possession and this connection that to this stream of legacy that I have access to through my writing and just the way that I do school and learning. That's how I'm able to tap into the spirituality of our community, and it just comes through in how I write and sometimes how I talk. Sometimes I'm writing and that's why I have to write things down because and read, because sometimes I start talking and just like you, Dhalma, things just come out. It's like, where did that come from? And it does sometimes feel like you can say sort of like a possession, but it's just all of a sudden something clicks and I sort of get connected to something that's much bigger than me, and then I just become this conduit.
An instrument. But if I may add, in society, an individual that accepts himself or herself is actually a better adjusted individual and will love him or herself, you know. So I think that doing this and helping others accept all of their parts, you know, will actually overall help a great swath of the population, Puerto Rican or not.
Yes, absolutely. You know, I definitely think, you know, like Genice was saying, the spaces and the privileges that you have, definitely utilize those opportunities. And, you know, I definitely do that working in government and being, you know, at the table. Sometimes just my physical presence at the table is enough to remind them of the decisions that they're making or what to take into consideration. And then, you know, you speak up and you start advocating on behalf, and then that's just another reminder and a reiteration to them, you know, of the importance and the value, but also not what you bring, but how those decisions will impact, and also crafting that change, voicing, you know, to the community is just so important. So, and reminding them, you know, in the space that, you know, Afro-Puerto Ricans are here, and you know, we are part of, you know, moving things along in the process as well. And I think that's been something, one of the challenges I've continued to face, you know, especially in my line of work, of being able to you know, outline that, you know, there is a Puerto Rican culture. I've been told so many times, you know, you're just a Black Mexican. And I go, actually, we have a whole island and a whole history and a culture, and let me bring you on into what we're about, just so, you know, you don't go around saying, you know, with this misconception and not being, you know, really informed on, you know, that history and that past. So I definitely, you know, I'm saying it loud and proud, but always make sure that in those spaces and the places where we have privilege to definitely use those opportunities.
For sure. Yeah, there's other conversations that I'm a part of that talk about Blackness in the Mexican community, and it's a very unique experience.
Yeah.
And Mexican, at least in Southern California or in the Southwest, is oftentimes a filler for Spanish speaker because of just what is the exposure for many non-Spanish speakers is primarily because they're not shared border with Mexico. And so, you know, those comments are they may not always be insidious or negative or mean. It's just that's where they're coming from. It's kind of like, I think Genice and I've talked about this before, that, you know, a pastele It's not a cake. It's kind of like a tamale.
Right.
But not. And talk a little bit about that, Genice.
Well, and I have the experience of growing up in Chula Vista, California, so South San Diego County, where if someone was Puerto Rican in the community, they're probably related to me. So versus my elementary, middle school, high school was like 99% Mexican. So when people do say like, oh, well, you're Black Mexican, right? Like I would always say, well, we're surrounded by Mexicans and I don't have a whole lot in common with them, even though we have a lot of commonalities. I know one story I had shared with Marie before in high school. I had a couple friends who were Puerto Rican and we were all in color guard. And we were doing hair for a competition. And I just talked over to one of the moms, like, dame los pinches. And all these Mexicans turned and looked at me like I had said something super offensive. And I was just like, I'm just asking for a bobby pin. Like, what did I do? And then and I was like, oh. Like, I didn't know that. Like, how did I get to like 16 years of life in, pretty much North Mexico and not know that was, that didn't mean what I thought it meant, because in my family and in my circle, it's the bobby pin. But like those types of things where, the language is similar but different, we're trying to explain like in relation to Mexican, because that was what was understood around me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could definitely agree to even the difference, East Coast, West Coast, Cali Rican, New York Rican, and having family visits and just those different experiences, definitely. I mean, even in high school, I can only join Mecha. There wasn't an actual group for Puerto Rican, and even being in that, I was like, I'm not really resonating here. So I think it's definitely finding those spaces, but also that experience as well, to just say, hey, appreciate you, we're a little different.
And Yolanda, you wanted to say something?
No, I'm identifying with them, but my mistakes with the Mexican argot cannot be said in this conversation.
So, and I think that's another topic, the linguistic differences that sort of trip out Puerto Ricans as well. It's probably a whole other panel, a whole other conversation. Like the word for cake. Seems to be problematic.
The word to take.
Oh yeah, and a minute. Can you hang? Yeah, and me voy ahorita. It's like, and people are expecting you to go like right now. It's just like, no, in a few minutes. So there's some differences in language that sort of makes it, not necessarily bad awkward moments, but funny awkward moments. So let me see now if there's anything that's coming up. Just checked. Facebook Live is up and running and people are loving it. So I'm going to see if anybody has any questions or anything along those lines. Oh, I see. Here's one. What message can you send to young Afro-Latinas who may be watching and who you may come across? What message? I guess from your vantage point in education, in politics, and in the literary world, in the counseling world, what would you tell them?
Would you like Dhalma? Go ahead, Dhalma.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Dhalma.
In terms of writing, for the longest time, when people in the United States thought of Puerto Rican writers, they thought Piri Thomas, which was 70 years ago.
Down These Mean Streets, that's his son, that's his most famous work.
That was his reality. There are many stories that define who we are. And I think that what I would say to young people is, if we don't start telling our own stories, somebody else is going to tell them for us, and it's going to end up being stereotyped. So the thing to do is claim your place, claim your voice, tell your own story. and there are many stories to be told. The story of someone who grows up in Vieques is different than the one who grows up in Chicago, is different than the two Puerto Ricans in a town in Texas. So there's a lot of room for us to tell the world who we are and what we stand for and what we believe in. And so I would like to see more Afro-Puerto Rican voices out there.
All right,
And
Genice.
I would have to say, get informed. If you want to be an astronaut, find out how to become that. These days are not like my days. Right now you can find anything online. So, and then color would only be a mention in your application, if anything, because I am a witness, I mean, or I would be an example that you can go to wherever you find out that you can go to. You see, I haven't gone anywhere else because I didn't know I could go there. But otherwise, I got it. Okay, so that's really my recommendation.
Yeah. And so you would push back against that notion of the imposter syndrome. You belong wherever you want to belong.
Absolutely. And you need to find the information, because the one thing is that nobody will give it to you. That's the thing.
That doesn't seem to stop very many Puerto Ricans from getting what we want. So,
we are naive in a way, so we find out, so we go there.
Genice, the question is, what would you, what message can you send to young Afro-Latinas in general, probably Afro-Boricua specifically, who may be watching and who you may come across from your perspective as an educator, I guess?
For me, as an educator, in claiming that identity, you can always control how you're presented. You can never control how you're perceived. So if you own it and you present it and people know that from the beginning, they know who you are, you're proud of it, then they're going to treat you as such. If you're presenting it, then they'll start to perceive it. So own that and present it.
Yeah, good point. And then whatever adjustments they have to do to accept the reality you're presenting, it's on them.
Exactly.
It's on them. I'm not about picking up other people's baggage and carrying it for them. True, very true. And Lachey, from your vantage point is.
Young Afro-Latinas, to embrace who you are, embrace your features, your skin tone, your hair texture, and embrace the diversity of who we are as well. And when I'm, putting on my government political hat, it can be intimidating because oftentimes, I'm the youngest person in the room. So what experiences, what values do I have that would attribute to the conversation? But I think all women said it best well is, speak your truth, tell your story, because it is of value. It needs to be heard, needs to be said. And don't be afraid to put your neck out there. I am actually running for school board, and it's actually an historic seat. There has never been a person of color on this seat, so I'm the first person of color to serve, hopefully, as well as first Afro-Latina on there. And I'm not afraid to go and put my neck and my line out there to at least show, even if I do lose, that it takes somebody to at least put their name out there and to try to put their face and to leave the that mark, but at least to show the community that you do care. So I would say, don't be afraid, because it always takes that one person, and then it leads to others, going along the same path. So it's okay to be the first one. It's okay to break those stereotypes, and it's okay to break those barriers down too.
And I think our affinity for remembering our history allows us to understand that so much has been done and sacrificed for us to be here, that we know that it is now our turn to sort of take that courage, own it, and then use that courage to move us. And it's like, it may not work out perfectly, but I'm going to try it anyways. And, being very thoughtful and compassionate and considerate of other people, but I'm going to run for office and see why wouldn't you, Lachey? Why wouldn't you? There's not a good enough reason for people if you wanted to, and people Why would somebody tell you no?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Except that, and then you would turn it back on them. It's like, well, why don't you want me to? And
Right.
then it's on them to fumble over their words.
Right. Exactly.
So, all right. And then the second question that came through is that most of you mentioned that sometimes people outside of the of Puerto Rico or the Puerto Rican community can't reconcile your identity of being Black and Puerto Rican. We spoke a little bit about this, but if you want to have either a particular example or speak more directly to this, how has this played into your professional life? Has it been favorable or unfavorable, presented challenges or maybe even opportunities? People not being able to reconcile your identity as Puerto Rican and Black. Dhalma, you want to start? You want some time?
I think when I was a teacher and a librarian for over 30 years, and I think that what I believed in as a teacher, and writing is just another level of teaching in a way, is that you lead by example, that the way you carry yourself, the way you speak, the way you interact with other people, doesn't allow them to dismiss you, right? And so I'm a middle-class, educated, feminist, Afro-Puerto Rican who is not shy about explaining that, if necessary, but that I walk many paths. And I remember having a conversation with a colleague at one point about going to see a Broadway show, and one of my students said to me, Puerto Ricans don't go to the theaters, that's for white people. And I said, well, this Puerto Rican is going, so I guess your theory is messed up, huh? And that's what I mean about teaching by example, is just, not only am I going, but I'm gonna take you with me. And so my years of teaching really honed my insistence on people recognizing who I was, who I am, and who I'll continue to be. And then of course, once I started writing, then I just pulled people into my world, which is a world of Black Puerto Rican enslaved people. And here, look at it. And this is who we come from. And this is why we're going to be here long after a lot of other folks may not.
Yolanda, how has others not being able to reconcile your identity of being Black, Puerto Rican, how's that played out in your professional life, whether it be favorably or unfavorably?
I used to call that a limbo, like a place, they would put me like in some kind of limbo. I wasn't Black, I wasn't white, I wasn't anything. And so I really have to say that I liked it like that while I was growing, growing meaning from graduation in high school all the way to getting my licensure and beyond it. So I really wasn't very much into asserting I am what I am and you put me in whatever limbo you want, because the way I saw it, they were underestimating me. But that wouldn't keep me from growing as I wanted to grow. You see, so in reality, that's what I would have to say. I've had arguments about, yes, I'm Black, but it's more of on the peer side of the professional, my professional career. You see, with my friends in the career. But when it comes to progressing in the career, I like the limbo.
And Genice, well, if people are, how do you come across people, when you've come across people having a hard time placing you racially and ethnically, essentially reconciling your Blackness and your Puerto Rican identity, how does that How has that impacted your?
For me, I think it's always giving me the opportunity to sort of push the envelope and create change. I remember in my first professional job in student affairs on campus, there was a Black faculty and staff association and a Latino staff association, and they met at the same time. So I was like, well, how are you going to make me pick? So why don't we just start our own or start something for us? So taking the opportunity to create space for others because that space wasn't created for me. I think it's that idea of giving back and really being the professional and the person that I wish I had had, throughout my professional journey, from like a baby student affairs professional now to a dean, being able to create that space for students and for other staff and faculty now that I have that opportunity.
Yeah. And Lachey, when folks can't place you, are they seem to sort of like there's dissonance.
Yeah, they don't know what to do. They see a name and then there's an accent over the E and it's French, but then last is Rodriguez, so it's Latin. And then like, what are you, how, and then it's always you're Mrs. Rodriguez. No, Miss Rodriguez. So there's a lot of assumptions being made off the back about me, but it's definitely been a challenge in the political arena where it has been very homogenous in leadership, and so I would say I know for a fact I haven't been seen for interviews or had certain attainment because just off the name. Regardless, if you look past the name, you see a whole resume with educational background as well as tons of years of experience and as well as networking and ties with the key folks. But I feel like it definitely has hindered some opportunities, but I think in most recent, maybe last 2 years, I've seen a little bit more of a embrace of wanting more diversity amongst staffing or wanting to kind of reflect the community that you serve. So we want to make sure. One thing I do have to take note is I have to make sure, especially here in Orange County, that I'm not tokenized. It's very easy for people to tokenize and say, oh, I'm not, look, I have the one, and I don't speak for all. So I have to make sure that I'm always, bringing that to folks' attention, but also that I'm not the one person, especially now everyone wants to be on a panel. Everybody wants, well, no, pick somebody else who can speak on the experience here. I'm not the only one here as well. So I think that's definitely something that I've had to shine a light on for a lot of folks in the arena. Even though they're well-intended, I think exposing those implicit biases definitely will help push things forward, but also changing those minds as well.
Yeah, for sure. With complexity, people want to simplify things, reduce things to, what's understandable. And so, Lachey, you're Black. Like, yes. Yes, I am. It's like, why don't you be on this panel? It's like, so what specific Black community did you want me to speak on? Because I can only truly speak on the Puerto Rican community. And oftentimes Black is a placeholder for African American in a lot of people's minds, just like Spanish Mexican is a placeholder for Spanish speaking in a lot of people's minds. And so it is a difficult reality. And that's a really important point you brought up about tokenizing, in student affairs, Genice. And I know that it's oftentimes, that 4-color brochure. And it's usually the same students until one graduates, and then the school scrambles to find the other one. And it's like, holy moly. So it is a challenge. Oftentimes I do get and it isn't you that liminal space, Yolanda, that you're talking about, that limbo. In literary terms, it's a liminal space, and it's a place where you sort of go in. And one time I was trying to explain it to somebody. It's almost like in Lord of the Rings, where Frodo, when he puts his ring on, he goes into this space where the ring wraiths can see him, and he can see them as they are, and it's a very interesting reality where everything's just sort of smudged, and it's hard to capture detail and all of that. I also, Yolanda, like to sit in that space. It's more confusing for the other person, so I have to be very strategic, because in confusion comes discomfort, and with that comes rejection sometimes. But it puts me in a place where I don't have to, you know, they're confused enough. They're not going to ask me any questions. They're still trying to figure out who and what they're dealing with, and it allows me to just sort of go about my business. It's just like, I'll check that in with you later.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, it has to be very strategic, because I can't sort of enact that or slip into that or be allowed to be placed into that space all the time, because then I'm never allowed out. I'm never allowed out, and it's always going to be, what are you? So they're what I've come to call cultural litmus tests. So, what are you? And you speak Spanish, and you know how to dance, and you know how to cook, and where are you from? Are you full? And it's like, oh yeah, can we just get to the project that we're trying to bring to life? And so it can be a very difficult reality sometimes. But you know, sometimes I do work out into my favor, and sometimes it can be a challenge. Just like again, in our realities and our experiences have some universal components to them. There are others that are similar. It's just this is how it comes about for us. So we've sort of come to, believe it or not, the end of our conversation. So, are there any sort of parting remarks that you want to share about just, you know, the title of the thing of this conversation is "Y tu abuela," and I sometimes feel like because that I sort of represent that abuela that oftentimes is that historically been made to sit off to the side, out of frame, away from company. Sort of this postmodern manifestation of that sentiment. And so, what do you Dhalma, what any parting words with regards to that?
Parting words. I think one of the things I would love to say to Latinx folks is take advantage of every opportunity that comes your way or that you can find. I think this society is limiting enough that we don't have to limit ourselves. So I think of this every time I'm in a workshop or in a space where I'm the only one. And I know that there's so many people who have the same qualifications and the same abilities, but don't have the impetus or the confidence or the drive. Well, not drive, because that implies that they're not willing to do. But walk into whatever space you want to walk into. Try. You know, sometimes we get doors slammed in our faces, but sometimes we bust the door down. So just don't stop yourself. If you want to go for it, go for it. Make sure you're ready. Make sure you have the skills, and then present yourself with, here I am. Why can't I have it? I worked for it. So there.
Exactly. Yeah. Actually, a question just jumped in about pain. Pain on display, because sometimes where people don't hesitate, especially with those that are the only one, don't hesitate to voice their discontent. And then we are in the moment on display, managing our own emotions while we're trying to not escalate the circumstances. Go around and then, because that's a great question. I want to make sure that if you want to speak to it, you can. Who wants to jump in this time? I'll just let the group. Give you a minute.
I didn't understand it.
The question about how, while current events allow for opportunities to highlight and share the Afro-Latina experience, the questioner is asking, I can imagine it's also heightens pain and puts that pain on display. How do you?
You know,
go ahead.
I would have to say that at this very moment, the pain that I have felt is for the community that I don't belong to all the way, which is the Black American community. I still feel some distance from that community because I didn't feel rejected as a child. I was not called Puerto Rican for being darker, not Puerto Rican for being darker, etc. At this time in my life, I've cried a lot in pain for that Black person that has not been acknowledged to be from the country that they belong to. Mm. So I would have to say I've even been almost like depressed, but it's a sadness. It's a sadness, a different empathy for, oh my God, now I get it. Mm.
Sort of a vicarious.
Yes. And I still don't think I'm touching it. So that's frustrating even more,
Well, what do you think about that, Lachey? Being someone who is moving through the public servant, political public servant sphere, that means that you are on display oftentimes. Even school board meetings are recorded in perpetuity, so you will forever be. But and how you manage slights, public slights, that may come to you more than your peers.
Yeah, no, it's a challenge. Orange County was recently quoted as being the Kentucky of California, because of a lot of the sediments out here. And since, Black Lives Matter movement and some of the protests, I've been targeted because of my skin tone. And I do have Black African American family members as well. So, I in myself, could very easily be based on looks, you're Black, therefore we treat you as accordingly. And so I do have constant concern and worry for my younger brothers, for my cousins, for my dad, my tios as well, and how they're going to just be treated just because of the effects. And also being on this highlight of having my name and being on the ballot and a candidate, there are sentiments where people, do not want me here. They do not want me to run. They don't want me to push for ethnic studies. They don't want me to, be in existence. And I've been told verbally many times, even going to a local grocery store about it. So I think there is pain, and I think I acknowledge it a lot, and I have to do mental health checks. There are some days where I don't want to go to work and be the only, Black person in the room to be told that Black Lives is, a Marxist movement here to destroy whites, white people, and that it's actually cry for equity and equality, not a supremacy, reverse supremacy model that they try to put it forth. So it's very jarring and tiring at times just to hear constant barrage of comments. And I think you do have to take a step out and step back and take a break and check in with yourself and, find your support system, go back, whether it's family or close friends or just reading or writing or just something to just break away from all of it, because we're in a new era of technology where we're in a constant system overload, constant barrage of information, whether it's social media or emails or TV, whatever. And so I have to make time to, just unplug and to get away. And it's not for me to, disconnect myself and say it doesn't exist anymore, but I just need a break to recharge my battery, to get my soul back up, to connect with my ancestors, to remind myself of, what we've gone through and, where we're going forward. And this is just, my moment right now in our storyline. So I'm definitely, taking the fact that I'm trying to find that circle and that network and do check-ins with other friends and family members as well, because that does mean a lot. And being out here where there is kind of scarce population, I've been told many times, there aren't enough Black people or people of color in Orange County to matter. So why? And it's like, well, I matter. I care to myself. So how, do I get that across to them as well? And I acknowledge not everyone's here to receive the message. Not everyone's going to care. And I cannot control that. And I cannot burden myself with the guilt of them not receiving that message either. So definitely a lot of checking in.
Good for you. That's you must do that if you're before you can ask that of other people. So that's important that you're doing that. Good for you. And Genice, what do you, going back to that question, how does that pain on display, because student affairs folks are just as flawed as everybody else. Just because we're in education doesn't mean that there aren't jerks out there. So,
well, and I think that's there's always an assumption within education that because we are educators, that we have more knowledge or more experience than others, that we should be better. And most of the time we're not. We're not any different than any other like microcosm or other community. So I think in sort of dealing with those challenging moments, one of the things I always like to go back to is thinking to myself that no is a complete sentence. So sometimes if I don't have the energy in that moment to give an explanation, it's not my job to educate you. So sometimes no just needs to be the answer. No is a complete sentence.
Okay. Very good. Yeah. We have a compliment. There's somebody that says, I would like to thank you all the panelists, but also share how difficult for me being raised as an Afro-Boricua with white skin and good hair. So the self-identity is different from the perceived identity, oftentimes. And how I was judged because I wasn't dark enough, my mom wasn't my mother, and so on. It's refreshing to hear similar stories, and so thank you for this panel. So it's good. And,
Nice.
what we're saying and what we're talking about and just sharing our stories within this particular framework is thankfully and expectedly resonating with a lot of people.
Nice.
And that's important. It's really, really important. These questions just keep coming. It's like, and you see them if you have your chat open. It's like, there is support from many in Puerto Rico on Black Lives Matter. How do you see your lives and experiences in light of what is happening in Black Lives Matter in the U.S.? I think we talked a little bit about that with regards to your Blackness, and then maybe how your people trying to see you both as Black and Puerto Rican. But if you want to say any things else, with specifically integrating the Black Lives Matter movement, and then you can also wrap up. You can do your final comments. We're getting close to time. So, Dhalma, yeah.
I see myself as very much a part of the Black Lives Matter movement, because when people approach me, they approach me as a Black woman. They don't know where I'm from. They don't care where I'm from. I'm very lucky that I choose to live in New York City, in a community where I don't have to confront the pain of that constantly on a daily basis in my neighborhood. However, it is there everywhere. I see it, people getting accosted for speaking Spanish in public, or for wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt in public, and that can happen anywhere. So I'm always ready for it, but it's very exhausting. It takes a lot of energy to be on alert all the time. And sometimes I just have to turn the television off because it leaches my creativity, it leaches my energy, it leaches my hopefulness. And so I'm on a diet from 24-hour news. I listen to one cycle, and I do not listen to the news 2 hours after I get up, or 2 hours before I go to bed. I will not take that negativity with me.
I should do that.
It works. It works because for me, those 4 hours a day are my remedios, my healing from all of the madness, whether health related or race related or whatever, all the madness that we are going through now. So if the question is pain, yeah, the pain is there. The question is, how do we keep being hopeful in spite of the pain?
Yeah, that's great. Yolanda?
Well, I've given myself the role of educator because I feel like I have a leg here and a leg in Puerto Rico. So, you know, when I finish working, my first call is to my parents in Puerto Rico, and the chat since the pandemic has been my friends from Puerto Rico. So if I see anybody from Puerto Rico saying something like all lives matter, then I take it upon myself to say, yes, it is difficult to be in Puerto Rico and visualize the difference between, you know, the BLM movement and, you know, and all lives matter. So I just go ahead and I take it upon myself to explain that all lives matter, to include Black lives, you know. So so hopefully I can give my grain of salt to the situation, and I avoid taking it personally.
How about you, Lachey?
In this time, I definitely see myself as a catalyst of change, especially with my position being in government and around policy. Policymakers, you know, it's really a great opportunity to really educate them and bring to light some of this, and also how we can actually change some of the laws and injustices. And I think, you know, we have to acknowledge that it's systemic, that, you know, we're trying to change, and it's in all levels. It's in our healthcare, it's in unemployment, it's in our housing, it's in, you know, our justice system, it's in education. And it can be overwhelming to think, how do we tackle all this at once? And I would say, you know, find, you know, that passion, that interest, and go in that route and make the change in that area. If it's healthcare disparities, or if it's in housing, and how do you get more affordable housing, or housing in areas where it's been disadvantaged communities. So I think it's just finding that niche, that passion, and going forth in that. And so I hope that along the way that I'm able to mentor folks along the way and educate, but also really, you know, be that catalyst to change. So.
Awesome. Awesome. And Genice, with regards to Black Lives Matter, how do you see your identity as an Afro-Boricua resonating?
I think, you know, it's hard to separate them, so I don't. So it's ingrained into the movement, it's ingrained into me. You know, and looking across my family, because it is diverse, like it's part of who we are. So having those conversations, and then I think professionally, you know, bringing that into the professional space as well. And as I said earlier, being able to use that privilege that I have to make those changes and to move that envelope in, you know, in the education sphere.
Yeah, I hear both you and Lachey, when you in that space, you understand the where you're at and the opportunity that you have, and so you really do. You have informed opinions, and you open your mouth and you speak your truth, and nobody can literally pick you up and throw you out, but they have to listen. They have to listen to you, and that's important, that you see the opportunity that you have in front of you, hard won and hard earned, and you take it. And so that's a good sign, because I think I sit between you and Genice, you and Lachey and Yolanda and Dhalma with regards to generations. I think I'm sort of in the middle, and so it is nice to see that continuum, that this energy seems to cross generations with regards to our internal fortitude and our strength of character, but understanding also that we need to take time to make sure that we're okay. And it isn't just our dimples, because I don't know if you've noticed, we all have dimples. That seems to be a Puerto Rican trait. It's much more than that. It goes much deeper than just our dimples. So any parting words now? I know Dhalma mentioned some parting words. So Lachey, do you want to do any parting words?
You know, I just want to tell young Afro-Latin ex-women out there, and well, men as well too. I know it tends to take a different role, but and non-binary as well, non-conforming, of, you know, just embracing yourself, loving yourself, doing self-care and check-in, and really, you know, this is a challenging time for all of us amongst talking about this, and COVID on top of that. So we're just in a world of layered complexities and different challenges and adversities that we're all facing. And so I would say to self-care, check in, but also make sure you build that system of support around you. Because I think we're definitely going to need it, you know, moving forward. There's a lot ahead of us. So.
Sure. How about you, Yolanda? Thank you. How about you, Yolanda?
Closing remarks.
Sure.
I would have to say, number one, I would have to say it's an honor for me to form part of this group. Thank you very much. And in terms of being Afro-Latina, I just go for what you want. It's about it, you know. Find out what first. Identify what is it that you would like to be, and then maybe you have to make adjustments in the meantime. But also find your information and go for it, because it's out there and it doesn't exclude you. So you need to find your inclusion.
Nice. Thank you. All right, Genice. Parting words.
Well, I just want to thank you, Marie, for putting this panel together and
Sure.
for inviting me to be part of this space. In terms of parting words, I think I've said it multiple times of using the privilege that you do have to enact change around you, no matter how small. So if it's, you know, a very limited space that you have any type of power or privilege in, use that limited space. And that one conversation you have with an individual might, you know, lead to change down the line in their life, in their spheres, and in a larger organization. So don't always think like, I'm just an individual, I'm just one person, I can't really make those changes, because you can enact them and like it starts to build. And if we have a lot of little people making those small changes that then start to amount to larger changes, like as a community, we can really come together and make some stuff happen.
True.
How about you, Dhalma? You want to do a few more sentences of your part? You've already done it, but I just want to give anything else that you want to say.
Well, I just hope that there are many more panels like this on different issues that affect us, because this is the moment to raise your voice. This is the moment to say we're here and this is what we need, and this is what we won't accept, and on whatever level you can.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. I really, really appreciate it. I want to take a screenshot of this, so I just want to make sure that everybody's ready. All I'm going to do is push print screen, so that will create an image. So go ahead and, oh, look at those smiles. I can smile. Okay, I caught it. That will give me an image. Let me make sure I do have it.
Did you say you noticed that all of us have dimples? Is that what you said?
No, I said that all of us have dimples.
That's so cute.
Yeah. Yeah. One time I walked into a room, and I was receiving a scholarship, and it was from a Puerto Rican organization in Northern California. And I walked around, and it's like everybody's got dimples. The last person. And I thought it's gotta be genetic. It's gotta be within the
strong
genes.
Just
Yes, the strong is within the Puerto Rican gene pool. Dimples are a very dominant trait. Let's just say that.
Yes.
It doesn't matter who we blend with either. So our offspring also seem to get these dimples from us. So, well, I'm gonna go ahead and do my formal thank yous, and then I'm gonna stop the recording. I did get the image, and that's wonderful. A big thank you to the participants on Facebook Live. I really appreciate it. We had about 90 people watch along with us, and we had over 400 people register for the event. And once the recording is finished, it will be posted, and then it will also be sent to everyone who registered. We'll have to figure out those logistics, but we'll make sure that everybody gets access to this recording. Thank you once again to the sponsoring organizations, especially to Jorge, Kevin, Gloria San Miguel, and of course Anaida Colón-Muñiz, the president of the NACOPRW-SOCAL. And again, I really want to thank the panelists. They're, as expected, a dynamic and well-spoken and spiritually charged group of women. Again, nothing that I did not expect. And so I wanted to thank you all again. So now that's the end of our formal presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. And
Good night.
good night, everybody. So don't wave, but I'm gonna stop the recording.